Hello, welcome back. In this video, we will discuss a basic concept, which is an example of one of those basic concepts we talked about in the video where we discussed how to break down examples. If you haven't seen that video, do go and watch it first and then come back to this. Today, we will discuss the topic of governance in the context of general paper or even English. Of course, just to be clear, while this is primarily targeted towards GP, what we're about to expound on can also be used to understand some topics in H2 history. We will touch more on it as we move along. Also, another caveat, you may think that, hey, this is too basic. Well, yeah, because it is. It is a basic breakdown meant for students aged 15 to 18 years old in Singapore. If you'd like more deep dive things, I would urge you to go and, watch one of those in-depth videos, I guess, by many of the wonderful content creators out there. So back to it. Now, in GP, governance is one of the most important topics. There are two reasons for this. The first is due to the fundamental nature of this institution and how it affects the lives of the masses. Number two, practically speaking, is one of the topics that will often come up for your A-levels, be it as a topic on its own or as an ancillary topic of discussion when you are discussing, well, other topics. That said, governance can certainly be a very complicated topic. However, it can be broken down into chunks so that we can better understand it. So, let's demystify it. Number one, what is governance? In short, it is the act of governing. This means an entire institution or organization filled with leaders and administrators carrying out the act of running a nation's day-to-day operations. How they typically do this is through implementing or enforcing laws, policies, and regulations. These are actions that the government takes, or to quote Rishi from the manga kingdom, wishes by the government in terms of how they want the people to lead their lives. There can be direct or indirect influences on society, but it really depends on the context. Now, what this dependence on context means is that you can explore governance in different situations. This can be in terms of economics, law and order, social affairs, education, defense, etc. Of course, often these policies and laws often work together to create a cohesive whole. So, for example, in economics, the Singaporean government often tries to maintain a budget surplus, which means that government earnings will outstrip spending. This is part of a longer-term strategy, one of maintaining fiscal sustainability to prevent, as much as possible, debts or to protect against a rainy day, like the COVID shit fire. In education, we strive to push students to institutions of higher learning, not just to maximize human development, but also to capitalize on our only natural resource, which is human resources. Policies thus consider many other factors and contexts in society itself. Within each of these topics, there are more things to explore, but if we were to go deeper, we may as well go through all the content for your 2 years in JC or 4 years in secondary school, or even start delving into university content. There's no need to do that yet. Thus, at this juncture, to prove this entire talking point, just go with any examples of policies implemented by a government, like the one on Singapore's approach to its budget. Whether or not your examples reflect virtuous policies in line with its purpose, that's another question to deal with later. So in short, what is governance? It is the act of governing by a government, and they indirectly or directly influence a society through laws and policies. And to prove that, use any laws and policies that might have an impact on society itself. Number two, what is the purpose of governance? Well, in a phrase, it is to ensure the welfare of the people. This means fulfilling the long and short-term interests and needs of the people. If there are extra resources, yes, they can give the people what they want, but a responsible government would always prioritize the former. As a result, fundamentally, in our basic analysis, this becomes our starting off point, upon which we can build further analysis, which is that a government would seek to secure said welfare interests. Everything that they do would aim to fulfill those interests of the people. For instance, this means that in education, they should seek to create a robust public education system that is affordable and accessible, while fulfilling, in short, a basic human right. Some good examples include the Scandinavian system and yes, the Singaporean system. In social affairs, this means protecting minority interests, helping the poor, helping the disenfranchised, and the disadvantaged. Any examples that demonstrate a government doing things to uplift the people tangibly would prove this point here. But a basic example can be social services present in nations like France, which has a comprehensive social security system aimed at supporting a large variety of things like healthcare, housing, workers' benefits, etc. etc. If you are looking for a quick explanation for how it works, check out this video by the Social Security Administration in France. Now, of course, to train your critical thinking skills, what we can ask ourselves is this. Why does it fall to the government to do all these things? This is where we need to first understand how the government derives its purpose. So in order to better tease out the responsibilities and obligations of a government, we need to understand how it works. Thus far, we have explored the basic fundamental purpose, but not its mechanisms and what such mechanisms actually represent. The reason why it falls to the government or a government to deal with such large-scale societal problems is because it is the institution in society that should have the most influence, and as a result, it should have the most resources, and its actions would have the biggest impacts on society. An understanding of civics is important because we may wonder, how does a government have the most influence? In general, in modern contexts, there are two ways a government derives its influence and therefore its power and resources. Either they receive the mandate from the people, or they force people into subservience. Sharper students at this juncture would realize that we are indeed talking about political structures. When people give a government the mandate, it means that they give a particular government the authority to do something. How this occurs is typically through elections. People vote for their leaders and as such give them said authority. In such cases, it's a democracy. On the other hand, the subservience route means that a government seizes control, whether it be the will of the people or not. Often not. This will occur in the context of authoritarian governments. Either way, the government derives its influence from such contexts, thereby deriving its powers accordingly. So what are the key differences between the two? A democratic state would see the government's power being divided into typically three branches: the legislature, executive, and judiciary, with the first being the one that's responsible for drafting and passing laws. The second one would administer the laws and policies and execute all these laws and policies, and the third would interpret the laws and uphold them. A simple example of this is the Westminster system in the UK, with Parliament, the ministries, and the courts. On the other hand, an authoritarian government would have all its branches typically collapsed into one, or have a farcical separation of powers, which means that on paper, power is separated between the three branches, but in reality, it is concentrated in the hands of one person or one singular ruling party. They would, in such cases, have the power and influence over all three branches of government. This can come under the utter and total control of one person like in North Korea or Turkmenistan, or a committee like in China. Different contexts have different structures, and as a result, some nuances between them. So if you're interested, drop us a line and ask questions, or go read up more on your own. Either way, these structures provide the governments with the influence. As a side note, you then may ask, what about kings or queens? Well, in the past, these seats of power have absolute control, and power is vested in this one individual. How the individual comes to power often stems from some sort of conquest of territories, and thereafter establishing their rule through claiming divine mandate. Chinese emperors in the past had the mandate of heaven. Southeast Asian kingdoms had the Devaraja concept, which was the concept of God King. And of course, the most famous institution, the British monarchy, used to derive their legitimacy through the divine right of kings, whereby they answer to no man-made authority except for God. There are modern monarchies, but many of them are constitutional monarchies, except for a select few like Saudi Arabia. Long story short, monarchies are authoritarian structures. Regardless of the political structure, as a result of this influence, the government would then have access to the resources and institutions that were established by their predecessors to carry out the act of governance itself. In cases of a newly independent state, or less developed one, or a change of regime, they would then have to establish the necessary institutions and processes that would provide them with all these resources. That's where we begin delving into economic policy or the drafting of bodies of laws, but that's for another day. Now, for the last question, where did things go wrong? For governance, the basic way to think about it is as such. If a government is meant to take care of the people's interests, why are there cases of them not doing so? In essence, we want to investigate why things turn out against the interests of the people. Typically, we do this by asking a few clarification questions and then investigating the causes and impacts of these problems. Broadly speaking, this can be distilled into two things. Do people demand things that run contrary to their own interests that cause the governments to go wrong? Or is it a case of just, well, bad governance? Often, these two things are correlated, especially in democratic contexts. If people demand things of their own representatives in government, their representatives are compelled to bring up such things in the legislature branch since they are voted into office. If they don't carry out the will of the people, they risk getting voted out of office. On the other hand, this isn't too much of a problem in authoritarian contexts, since the government does not necessarily need to wholly represent the people. However, in carrying out the will of the people, we must be cautious about one thing, which is that different viewpoints will inevitably arise in terms of what is considered best for the people. In such scenarios, one may disagree on how these interests can be best served. Such disagreements occur in various contexts, be it in tax reform, education, economic policies, foreign policy, etc., etc. For example, we may, and we should, advocate for the mega rich in society to pay more taxes in order to increase tax revenues to fund government programs. However, the mega rich will obviously oppose this since they obviously don't want to pay more taxes. They may use arguments like, I worked hard for it, blah blah blah, and in some cases, maybe. However, that does not bring in the context of how they got there, but we'll deal with this in another post. On the other hand, we may advocate for greater spending on support packages to alleviate the costs of the middle class in society. But economists may oppose this, as they may assert that this will not deal with the root of the issue and instead worsen inflation. And indeed, that may be the case if governments don't deal with wages, nor possible price jacking by big corporations in response to the short-term boosts in consumers' ability to spend. Regardless, when investigating how things go wrong, one must first be anchored by the facts underpinning the debates themselves. This means that debates can be had, but only if we agree on some baseline facts. For example, you may have a debate with someone over whether the best ways to deal with, say, increasing obesity rates. You can debate over the merits of approaches like advocacy for more exercise, or regulating food suppliers, health information on products, etc. But a debate can't be had if the two opposing sides don't even accept the basic or common baseline of facts. Maybe one is saying that obesity rates are increasing, but the other one says, I don't know, people are just becoming big-boned. What is there to debate then in that scenario? If facts are neglected, we risk going down the rabbit hole of dogma, or worse, stupidity as defined by Dietrich Bonhoeffer. We cannot simply choose to believe facts that may conform with our worldviews, and we must be more open-minded in accepting different viewpoints. But facts must remain steadfast. Malleable facts are no longer facts, and non-factual debate risks ever-shifting goalposts with the inevitable result of a lack of resolution. So assuming that a common baseline of facts and concepts is established, we can then begin investigating the reasons for the failure of governance by asking questions on any issues that a nation faces. Such questions can be easily achieved by asking, again, we are coming back to the case study questions, what happened? That's where we clarify the facts of the case study. What are the impacts? That's where we, analyze the impacts of the case study. Why is it a problem? Again, building on the impacts because they often overlap with each other. And finally, how did this happen? So that's where we investigate the causal factors or reasons for whatever case study that we are looking at. If you have seen our case study breaking down tuition advertising in Singapore, you would know that these questions form the backbone of our analysis. In the context of governance, the first three questions require a lot of legwork, assuming you are building your knowledge from the ground up or from scratch. You need details and facts, so that means copious amounts of research. Intimate knowledge, for better or for worse, is a prerequisite before you can even begin asking the important questions. That's it. The last question, i.e., how did this happen, is the crucial bit, since various explanations can be produced using various perspectives. In this case, there can be an almost non-exhaustive list of ancillary questions we can ask, like, is there a lack of information that may hamstring a government from taking action? Number 1. Number 2, are there sufficient resources and processes/infrastructure, both tangible and non-tangible, to deal with the problem? Number 3, is there a cultural imperative in society that keeps the government's hands tight? Number 4, what are the glaring and impactful flaws in the system? Or if we really want to investigate possible insidious reasons, or at least the more insidious ones, Number one, are there influences on the government that may detract from the government's fundamental purpose? Number two, is the system inherently favoring certain interests over others? Number three, is the administration just utterly and irrevocably incompetent and clueless? Well, these are just some simple questions we can ask ourselves. We can then apply these to a case study breakdown in a follow-up post in the future. In a nutshell, to conclude, this is the basic framework of governance. To summarize again, the questions we looked at are: what is it? It is the act of governing, typically done through laws and policies. What is its purpose? Governments have to take care of the long and short-term interests of the people, and they do it through laws and policies. Number three, how does it derive its purpose? In the modern age, that's typically done through democratic processes or through the seizure of power and the subsequent establishment of an authoritarian system. These are the basics of governance. As we investigate where things go wrong, we will cover more case studies, so keep a lookout for it. If you have found this useful, I strive to offer consumer-friendly general paper, English and H2 history lessons that are focused on you learning concepts well, and of course applying them in the exams. After all, if you can't apply them on your own, it'll be futile out. But we are much more focused on the former and the process of finding answers with the given answers, of course, so things like suggested answer schemes, rather than acting as a magic bullet. But if you want to learn and you are interested, do contact us for a free trial lesson. All our contact information is on our website. And yeah, so see you guys next time.